The pushback from lesser developed countries, a word commonly used here is blowback, who had felt taken advantage of back in the post-World War II world of America versus Soviet Union, will only intensify in the 90s and the early part of the 20th century. They see the post-World War II order as set up to impoverish them at the benefit of the larger, more developed countries, and they reject that system. Of course, we tend to think of this primarily in the Middle East, but we're going to see this in many places all over the world. There's also a rejection of the new liberal, and I mean here small l, not big L, culture that's developing in America and Eastern Europe. And so places like Iran, who of course had fallen under the control of a Shiite fundamentalist government in 1979, will become angry about what they see as the promiscuity of American women, for example, or America's acceptance of drug use or alcohol or whatever it may be. And that, as well as America's endless interventionist policies throughout the world to benefit America, are going to lead to just waves of terrorism. Now, I want to offer a definition of terrorism so we can be clear about what we're talking about. Terrorism is violence against a civilian population with the intent of affecting policy. So that's my definition of terrorism. If you've got a different one, throw it in the comments below. I'm always really interested about how we use that word. Terrorism is nothing new in American history or world history. I would argue that the largest, most well-organized, and in many ways the most successful terrorist group in American history is the Ku Klux Klan. You may not think of them as a terrorist group. You might think of Middle Easterners, but here we are, white Southern men. And I think they're the most significant terrorist force in American history. When I was growing up, if you use the word terrorist, you might think of my people. I have Irish ancestry, and the Irish Republican Army fighting against British occupation and using violence to do that. They were a major terrorist group. Both the Israeli side and the Palestinian side have used terrorism. Of course, both of them will deny it, and I'm sure I'll get comments to that effect below, in their struggle over control of that strip of land they both occupy. And of course, we've had many, many, many local groups, both here and abroad, trying to use this. It's often used by people who see themselves as powerless against a much larger, more powerful threat, and so they don't know what else to do. That's not to justify it. I'm strongly opposed to it, but that's usually the recipe that leads to it. You might think, by the way, of the car bomb I talked about in the late 19-teens. Early 1920s on Wall Street. That was terrorism. In the 1960s, we had some left-wing terrorism. Much of it was kind of a mild version of terrorism because they would often take great efforts to make sure they didn't actually hurt anybody. But sometimes they did. The Black Panthers and activist groups, particularly in Oakland, were overtly violent. The pro-life movement has often engaged in terrorism, as I mentioned before. And of course, we've already seen American targets be hit both at home and abroad. Particularly, you might think of the attack on the embassy in Beirut while Reagan was president, or the murder of the CIA station chief, William Buckley. I know it's a different William Buckley. But in February of 1993, when a group of Islamic terrorists, who we will later understand to be associated with Al-Qaeda, will plant a truck bomb in they'll park it in the parking garage of the World Trade Center. It was that this would cause the whole building to fall down. Well, it did explode, but it didn't cause the whole building to fall down. But it was a significant terror attack, and really, I think, woke many Americans up to the idea that there were these people out there who were very much intent on hurting us. Of course, in April of 1995, we're going to have the Oklahoma City bombing. Now, this is domestic terrorists. These are conservative activists angry at the federal government, really responding in a lot of ways to the anti-government talk that had been going on since Reagan. Timothy McVeigh is ultimately executed for this. There's belief that he was working with a group of people, but later we claim that he wasn't. One of the things that he was protesting against when he parks this truck bomb, this rental truck filled with fertilizer outside the federal building in Oklahoma City, tragically right outside of a daycare in that particular federal building, was the attack. Well, I shouldn't say that. An incident in Waco, Texas, where the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms had laid siege to a religious compound that was stockpiling guns, and then ultimately, apparently, the religious compound, the people in there set the building on fire rather than give up, and many people were killed. McVeigh saw this as some degree of government tyranny and was striking back against this.